Hello friends, I am Dr. Pranav Khoche from Nutan Vidya Prasarak Mandal's Arts, Commerce and Science College, Lasalgaon. We are going to discuss this year SYBA's discipline specific course 2, that is appreciating poetry. And in this lecture we are going to deal with definition of poetry. So, the first topic in theory of poetry is obviously what is poetry? Here is a definition from Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary which explains what is a poem. So, let's read this definition carefully. A poem is a piece of writing in which words are arranged in separate lines, often ending in rhyme, and are chosen for their sounds and for the images and ideas they suggest. Now, let's discuss this definition in certain sections. The first section or the first phrase would be separate lines. A poem is a piece of writing in which words are arranged in separate lines. Friends, in paragraph or in a prose piece of writing, lines are written in paragraphs. Words are arranged in a paragraph. So, the lines or the sentences are written one after another, one sentence following another. But in a poem, when we talk of a poem, we immediately recognize that it is a poem because lines are arranged in separate lines. Right? Often, so that is the very first important indication of a poem, that when you look at a poem, you immediately understand it's a poem because words are arranged in separate lines. So basically words, they are arranged, there is arrangement of words in a poem. How is that arrangement? That arrangement is done in separate lines. That arrangement is done in separate lines. Those lines often end, not always, but this is another important feature of poetry, that the lines in poetry often, usually, not always, but often, usually, they end in rhyme. What is a rhyme? Rhyme is similar sounding words. And these words are, next section of this definition would be, the words are chosen. The poet chooses words. He does not randomly write words. Without thinking, he does not compose a poem. The words in any poem are chosen. And why are they chosen? The words in a poem are chosen for their sounds and for the images and ideas they suggest. So, the words are chosen for their sounds. Right? The musical effect, the echoes. Right? So, words are chosen for their sounds, and second important thing, words are chosen for the images. When Robert Burns says that my love is like a red, red rose, the image of a red rose, a fresh red rose, it comes in front of your eyes. So, for the images and ideas they suggest, poetry gives you ideas. A poem throws in front of you certain images and it also gives you ideas. And that's why poetry is also called the best philosophy in the world. Right? In the next slide, we are going to discuss or understand this particular definition by understanding an example, by reading an example of a poem, or rather a stanza of a poem. But before that, let's read this definition again. A poem is a piece of writing in which words are arranged in separate lines, often ending in rhyme, and those words are chosen for their sounds and for the images and ideas they suggest. Now friends, here is an example of a very famous poem, A Red Red Rose by Robert Burns, that you have studied in the last year in your compulsory paper. Now, just we discussed a definition of a poem. So, a poem is a piece of writing in which words are arranged in separate lines. So, if you see this stanza from A Red Red Rose, you can see that all these lines are separate. That means they are not like paragraph written one after another, one line following or one sentence following another, but these lines, the words are arranged in separate lines. If you see, this is only one sentence. In these 4 lines consist, they make only one sentence, right? But for the effect of poem, the poet Robert Burns has arranged this one sentence. This full stop is here. So full stop indicates the sentence starts from "Oh my love" and it ends at the word "tune." So a poem is a piece of writing in which words are arranged in separate lines. So I think that point should be clear. Often ending in rhyme. Now, if you concentrate here, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. So, in this stanza, you understand that these 2 words, June and tune, they sound similar, which means they rhyme. Right? So, the definition says that a poem is a piece of writing in which words are arranged in separate lines, right? 4 lines are there, one sentence, make on one sentence consists of 4 lines, and they often end in rhyme, that is June and tune, and these words are chosen for. These words, the Robert Burns, even this is a very simple poem, but Robert Burns had chosen these words to give certain effects. What are those effects? Chosen for their sounds. If you see here, oh, my love is like a red, red rose. These 3 words, red, red rose, the r sound is repeated. You know that this figure of speech is called alliteration. And at the same time, red, red. So when you read this red, red rose, an image, first of all, it gives you certain music, certain rhythm, a red, red rose. Right? So words are chosen for the sounds. And moreover, they are also chosen for the images. right? We'll go back to this particular definition in which it says the words are chosen for their sound. So red, red rose, this rhythm you get here. June and tune, these rhyming words you get here. So it is also melody, it is also a sound effect, right? A music, it creates some kind of music in the poem. And the words are chosen for the images. As I was telling you a moment earlier, when you read, my love is like a red, red rose, that image of a red rose, fresh rose, comes into your mind. The next line says, that's newly sprung in June. Again, that freshness, that fresh rose, image of a fresh rose, newly sprung, because it's newly sprung in June, it comes in front of your eyes. And then it says that, oh, my love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. So image is not necessarily only a visual image. It can be a sound image or auditory image. So when he says my love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune, you feel that music of the melody that is played very sweetly, right? And ideas, the words are selected for the images and the ideas. What is an idea here? Idea of love. And what is that idea of love? It is fresh like a red rose. It is not an old love, but it is very fresh like that fresh red rose. The color red also suggests intensity, right? Intensity of his love. So red rose, and we also know that red rose is a symbol of love. So that idea of love gets imprinted in our mind, on our mind, by these two lines. And then the sweetness of love, the idea of sweetness, love as sweet as melody, as a melody, right? This idea also gets imprinted on our mind. So therefore, the definition we just read and discussed, that a poem is a piece of writing in which words are arranged in separate lines, often ending in rhyme, and are chosen for their sounds and for the images and ideas they suggest, given in Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary, is exemplified by these 4 lines, the short stanza in the poem, my love is like, a red, red rose. Right? At the last, in the definition, there is word suggest, right? For their sounds and for the images and ideas they suggest. Please try to understand that in poetry, the poet does not give you something directly. The poet never imposes something on you. But poetry is called an art of indirection or an art of suggestion. Poet gives you lines of poetry, but he does not always say, no, I say that this means this because this means this. No. He just gives you lines, he gives you his chosen words, and then you are free to interpret. He just suggests through his poem. Right? So that's why the definition says the ideas and images are suggested by the words in a poem. To understand a definition of poetry is in a better way, to understand the nature of poetry in a better way, we must discuss some definitions given by practitioners of poetry, that is, some famous poets. Those who wrote poetry, those who wrote many hundreds of poems. We must try to see what these famous poets says about the poem. So, in a way, the definitions given by these poets, three poets are here: William Wordsworth, a famous romantic poet, Philip Sidney, and P.B. Shelley, another romantic poet. So, the definitions by them is a kind of, they are now well recognized definitions, and that's why they become the part of theory of poetry. So, according to William Wordsworth, poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. The second sentence in the definition is, it takes its origin from emotions recollected in tranquillity. Tranquillity means a peaceful state of mind, when your mind is at peace, right? It is not disturbed, it is not excited, but it is peaceful. So, the first sentence is poet. Now, this definition has two parts, right? First part is, poetry is spontaneous. It is not, spontaneous means sudden, which is not pre-planned, which is not planned earlier. So poetry is a spontaneous overflow. You know, students, what is overflow, right? Getting overflowed means flowing over the rim or over the edge, like the water flows from the dam when it overflows, right? So poetry is a spontaneous, here he says poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, not ordinary feelings, but powerful feelings. This is the first part of the definition by William Wordsworth. So, first thing, that these feelings must be spontaneous. Second is, it is not just flowing of feelings, but it is spontaneous, like a fountain, sudden, unplanned. It is, those feelings should come to the poet's mind. They come to the poet's mind spontaneously, and there is not, they are not weak, but there is overflow of those feelings which are very powerful. The second part is that poetry, it means poetry takes its origin from emotions recollected, emotions recalled, emotions remembered in tranquility. Right? Tranquility means peaceful state of mind. So, it takes, though poetry, now be careful here, students. Though poetry is spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, it becomes a poem becomes a poem when those emotions are remembered or recollected, when you are at the peaceful state of mind. Friends, Wordsworth has explained this definition wonderfully. According to him, we will try to understand this definition and clear our confusion, if there is any. First sentence is, poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So Wordsworth says that when a poet observes or sees anything, it may be a beautiful thing, it may be a horrible thing, it may be anything, right? But when he sees or witnesses something, it may be an natural object, an object in nature, it may be a rainbow, it may be a peacock, it may be anything. So when a poet encounters a particular object, there is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings in his mind. So he is overwhelmed by the powerful feelings. The poet is overwhelmed. He feels those feelings surge, the tide of feeling surges in his mind. Right? And therefore, when he sees something which touches his mind, which moves him, which makes him emotional, or which gives him feelings, there is this overflow. That object must be so that there is a spontaneous, or it can be an object, friends, it can be an experience. Even that many experiences. For example, eating your favorite dish, it gives you a beautiful experience. You like it, and there are feelings in your mind then, right? So, and subject of poetry can be anything under the sun, can be anything in the world. Therefore, when there is a certain experience of, that can be visual, that can be auditory, that can be experience of taste, anything, there is powerful, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. But the poet does not start writing, according to Wordsworth, the poet does not start writing poetry immediately when he has that sense experience, when he witnesses certain experience. But as I said, he does not start composing poem immediately, no. But Wordsworth says that after that particular sense experience, when the poet's mind is tranquil, when the poet is in the peaceful state of mind, he composes poem. How does he composes a poem? His mind is tranquil, his mind is peaceful, and he recollects, he remembers those emotions when he had that experience, when he had that spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings by that experience. So in the second stage, he remembers that particular experience which had the effect of powerful feelings. Not only powerful feelings, but spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. The poet tries to remember that particular thing, that particular experience, and those emotions. Now again, there are emotions in his mind, but his mind is tranquil, and then the composition, then the writing of a poem takes place, it begins. Then he uses his chosen words to describe his experience, his sense experience. I hope you have understood William Wordsworth's definition of poetry, that poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings which takes its origin. It does not take origin immediately after the spontaneous overflow, but it takes its origin from the emotions that poets recollects in tranquility. Similar emotions, similar feelings come to his mind which gave him spontaneous overflow. This particular definition can be very well understood if you read his poems like The Solitary Reaper or Daffodils, I Wander Lonely as a Cloud, right? So I request you to read that poem and then read this definition again, so you will understand this definition in a better way. Another great poet and critic, Philip Sidney, says that poetry is an art of imitation. This word imitation is important here. So Philip Sidney says that a poet copies, he imitates the nature. He describes the world around him, he describes nature around him, he describes or in a way represents, which in a way is imitation, that is like a painter. If just try to visualize, just try to imagine a painter who is painting a beautiful natural scene. What does he do? He tries to copy that beautiful scene in his painting. In the same way, Philip Sidney says that poetry, what does he do? A poet, poetry is an art of imitation. He imitates the world, he imitates the people, he imitates. Imitates here means not exactly copy, but he represents the world around him in his poem, in his poetry. So he says that poetry is an art of imitation, it is a speaking picture. In the earlier definition in the Cambridge Dictionary, we saw that poet poet chooses words for the images, and here Philip Sidney calls poetry as a speaking picture, because poet uses words, he chosen words, beautiful words, effective words to describe something that comes in front of your eyes, that appears in front of you. When you read a poem, certain images appear, they come in front of your eyes, and therefore Philip Sidney calls poetry as a speaking picture. And he goes a step further. He goes a step further when he says, with this end, that is, end here means purpose, intention. What is the purpose of the poet by writing poetry, or what is the intention of poetry? It is to teach and delight. Friends, this is very important and significant phrase. To teach and delight. A poet not only gives you delight, that not only gives you happiness through his poem, but he teaches you about life. This is very important. When you read a poem, or in general, when you read literature with full attention, you become wise, because literature teaches you so many things. So, poet is also called a greatest philosopher, right? So, poetry teaches you, and at the same time it also gives you happiness. While you are reading poems, it teaches you about life, but not in a dull way. No, not in a dull way. It does not bore you, but it gives you happiness. That is the definition by Philip Sidney, that poetry is an art of imitation, that is, the poet represents the world around him in the poem. It is a speaking picture, because by use of imagery he gives you picture by words, by using words. That's why speaking. By using words we visualize so many things in a poem. We can visualize so many things in a poem, and the purpose of poetry is very noble, that is to teach and delight. Another great romantic poet like P.B. Shelley says that poetry is an expression of it is an expression of imagination. Poetry is an expression. What does a poet do? He expresses his feeling, emotions, and he at the same time he imagines, and he gives you an expression of his imagination. So like speaking picture, like imitation. So these two definitions are little bit different from each other. You may say that they are opposite. They are opposite little bit to each other. Philip Sidney says that poetry is an art of imitation, but Shelley says that it is an expression of imagination. But friends, both these definitions are equally true. Both these definitions by Sidney and Shelley are true, because in poetry he imitates, means he represents the world, and at the same time he does not merely copy the world or nature or people, but he uses his imagination, he mixes, he blends his imagination in his poetry, and therefore poetry becomes beautiful. Therefore it makes us emotional, and it also teaches us. So friends, I hope that we have understood these four definitions of poetry. The first definition, that poem is a piece of writing in which words are arranged in separate lines, often ending in rhyme, and are chosen for their sounds, for the images and ideas they suggest. This particular definition you must have understood by now. The example by Robert Burns, a stanza in his poem A Red Red Rose, we discussed, and we also discussed three definitions by these famous poems, that is William Wordsworth, Philip Sidney, and P.B. Shelley. If you have any doubts, please contact me about this definition, and I'll try my best to solve and clear your doubts. We'll stop here, we'll stop this lecture. Thank you so much.